hear me? So yeah, I've just kick it all off. This is my talk on the securing logins and registrations in web applications, which is a much less exciting title than the one that Kurt came up with earlier. I wish I'd stolen it, but I forgot to change the title, so you were stuck with that one. Sorry, first off, big thanks to Redshield for providing the venue. This is absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it was a great venue, and great that we get sort of 50 odd people over, so that's fantastic.
Great people.
Sorry?
Great.
Yeah.
I
Great
apologize for the,
that's right.
the bottle of warm.
As I say, I moved down from Auckland, so I can cope with this. This is okay. At least it's cooler than up there. And thanks to Insomnia for sponsoring pizza. It's much appreciated. That'll be coming around about 7 o'clock, so I'll hopefully not take too long. So who am I? Well, I tried to give PowerShell some love here. It's not really it doesn't quite have the same ring to it. I'm a security engineer at Fairfax Media, stuff.co.nz and friends. Previously I was around health, a little bit of a threat model change there, going from healthcare to journalism, where everything is private in healthcare, and then suddenly we're moving off to the thing where everything's public. So I have been working with .NET professionally for about 5 years, been dabbling in it for about 10 years now, which is baffling. It's gone through some quite interesting changes lately, especially with .NET Core, yay, open source. I've got a bit of a security focus on web tech, particularly around authentication and authorization flows. And you can find me on GitHub at Matt Cotterell NZ if anybody can figure out how to spell my last name. On Twitter and on Keybase, which they've just changed their logo to something slightly less recognizable now. But if you need to send me anything, you need to ask me any confidential questions, you're more welcome to go and encrypt it that way. Right, so as I said before, about 6 months ago, I moved down with my flat. We're about 4 IT geeks, 3 of them which work in InfoSec, and the other 2 are actually right there. I'm going to point them out now. We've just moved into a house that's sort of built in the 90s, and we're, being geeks, we're all like, oh, cool, what can we do with this house? And unfortunately, there's no smart devices anywhere. So hack all the things. We decided we're going to go and, there's an alarm system in there. There's all sorts of things. We're going to make sure we do it carefully because it's still a rental. We can't just break anything. Made a flat API with the mobile app, which allows us to control the house. We've got, it activates and deactivates the alarm, it adjusts the central heating temperature, reminds us when it's rubbish day, records the weather, monitors power usage, and all sorts of other ridiculous bollocks. The only problem is the rent's still done manually. There's absolutely no way that we can tell whether when the rent's been paid or who's paid what and what bills are coming in and out. Thanks. Why do you publish APIs for geeks? So I thought we'd do the one same thing that everybody, all us geeks would love to do. Make my own bank with REST and webhooks. And so introducing GeekBank, a totally fictitious bank. Seriously, this is a bad idea. Don't even give me money. I can go with my own wallet. So we're going to use this as a bit of a premise for our login and registration flows. It's good to go and sort of set up a bit of a sort of context to these things. It helps you, threat model, and every single scenario is a little bit different. So in this particular case, we've outsourced our web application to a overseas third party who have gone and built the website for us while we go and try and find a lawyer who goes and tries to talk some sense into me making up a bank. And they've come back with the first iteration, which has a login and registration form. So we're going to go and start looking through that and make sure everything's all up to scratch. So I'm going to break it down into 4 areas. We've got the, 2 areas, but we're going to break up the login page into 3 sections. So we've got the registration form. So there's a bunch of things we're going to go and check here. Before the login, we're going to check things like username enumeration and using password managers and password resets and things. During the login, so once we've submitted the form, what happens there, and after they're logged in. Go and touch on each of these points, and I'll go and show some examples and maybe if you demo or 2. And I'll talk about some stuff like mobile logins and touch on the OWASP top 10 while we're at it. So first off, registration page. There's 4 key points I want to go and point out here. The first one here is gather only the information you need. Our website's come back and it's looking all very nice with mono-spaced font and a neat little logo in the corner there, and capture in the corner there. But the interesting thing about this part is going to be the form itself. So we've got usual sort of stuff, username, password. Seems reasonably sane to go and ask for that in the registration form. Next, we've got the name, asking for things like name, an address, and phone number, and email. These sorts of things, if you were, say, making a forum, for example, this is probably something you wouldn't really want to be asking people. But, you know, as I say, we're making a bank, so maybe it is reasonable to be asking for people for their name, address, and phone number, and you know, their email address and things like that. Date of birth, probably a little bit dubious. I mean, maybe we do need to know that they're over 18 so that they can actually start up certain bank accounts and things like that. But, you know, maybe we could just ask them if they're over 18 or not, or maybe a date of birth is actually a reasonable idea. Lawyers may tell me otherwise. Gender, this is probably a little bit dubious. It's like, it's not that you're going to be handling money differently just because someone's male or female, or also it's a sort of a dodgy question to ask because a lot of people don't identify as either male or female, and people get a little bit upset with being lumped into the term other.
At least you made it a text box.
That's exactly it. So that was one thing I was going to mention. A lot of people just do a drop-down box. You can just stick anything you like in there, but then you've got to start asking yourself, do we really need this information? Maybe, maybe not. Marital status, okay, we're not doing mortgages here. We probably don't need to know this information. This is getting a little bit dubious. Now I've got height in centimeters, weight in kgs. You know, this is getting a little bit over the top. Too much information, right? If we go to the Privacy Commissioner, this is, you know, they've got a, 12 or 13 privacy principles. Principle number 1 here is purpose of collection of personal information. First off, they ask, you know, are you collecting things for legal purposes? You know, is what you're collecting this information for legal? But the second thing here is the collection of information necessary for the purpose. If we don't need to collect this information, we probably shouldn't be gathering it for privacy reasons. But even beyond that, there's a security issue here as well. Like, for example, there's an absolutely fantastic website by a guy over in Australia called Troy Hunt, who makes haveibeenowned.com. Spelled with P. Have been pwned? Everybody pronounces it differently. And where you can type in your email address and figure out whether you've been in any publicly leaked information. Qatar Bank, for example, got leaked a whole bunch of information in July 2015, and the information that they've leaked here is quite terrifying. They've leaked passwords and banking pins, for example, but we can rotate those. You know, we go, oh no, we have to go and memorize a new password or put a new password in our password manager. It's not the end of the world. But now you're losing some other information here as well, like physical address and phone numbers and you know, marital status and spoken languages. You know, a lot of these things here you can't easily rotate. You can't easily you know, change this information. You can't easily you know, you can't reset your physical address. You can reset your password. It's not hard enough. But you know, leaking a physical address is a bit of a security concern for anybody involved in the data breach. So gathering only the information you need. Otherwise, it is an unnecessary liability. Second point here: hash your passwords. This is again, I know this is we're all you know, security people here, but go through it anyway. Occasionally, some people might not know this. If we've got a password, for example, say XC3511, bonus points for anybody who understands who gets the reference. The hash license plate? No, it's not a license plate. This is, you know, the Mirai botnet. That's not the password, isn't it? If you hash it, hash that particular string, it turns into this long sort of hex blob here. The whole thing with it is you can turn it from the password into the hash. You can't easily reverse it from the hash back into the password. Problem is if you've only got these two, if you've only got the password and you don't add anything else to it, if someone else has the same password, it results in the same hash, etc., 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 etc. If that password was, say, password, you'd see that password, those hashes appear a lot more often in the database, and it gives you a hint that this is possibly a more common password. You don't want this kind of scenario happening. So, take 2. We go and add a little bit of random data onto the end of it, called a salt. Again, results in a hash, but if we add a different salt to it, we get a different hash, etc., etc., etc. Problem is these are really quick to generate, so we want to make sure that we, so take 3. If we do one iteration of that particular hash, so we only hash it once, it'll take about 200 microseconds to go and generate this, which is, you know, really, really quick. If you're trying to brute force passwords, you'll be able to do a lot of these in a very short space of time. So we're going to make this a little bit harder. So we hash this thing over 10,000 iterations. Now, there's specific algorithms that do this in a proper fashion, but distilled down to the guts of it, that's basically the situation. And it will result in something that takes 200 milliseconds. Again, when you're logging in, you're not going to know the difference between 20 microseconds and 200 milliseconds. But when it comes to brute forcing something, it'll result in, instead of it taking sort of weeks or months, it'll take years, decades, or even centuries. So use slow hashes with unique salts. Next point, encourage highly entropic passwords. As far as encouraging strong passwords, humans are really, really bad at trying to do random data. I mean, for an example here, everybody think of a number between 1 and 10. Raise your hand if you thought 5 or 7. Yeah, so it's probably, I hate when it doesn't work quite that well. Usually a lot more people will raise their hands for 5 to 7, because everybody, for some reason, just automatically defaults to one of those two numbers. I was going to say then, hey, raise your hand if it was 1, but somebody called it out already. So you ruined my demo. No, it's all right. But normally, most people won't think of 1 as their random, as a random number between 1 and 10. It'll be a lot less than 10%, and 5 or 7 will be a lot more than 20. So we're really bad at doing this. What we've done in the past is we've gone and got people to go and memorize certain patterns. So we've said, when you're making a password, use a capital letter, use a number, use a symbol, make sure it's at least 8 characters. And it sort of gets people into the idea of, making slightly longer passwords. But it's kind of a bit of a misconception, really, because you end up with a lot of passwords that end up looking like this. Like, for example, basketball 1991 exclamation mark. Sure, it meets those minimum definitions there, but there's not a lot of randomness in this. Like, it's got a capital letter, it's got some numbers and a symbol in it, but it'll take a decent password cracking rig about 22 seconds to actually crack that one. It's just not, it's not going to take much time whatsoever. Something like this, for example, QUER43 exclamation mark. If you have a look at that on a keyboard, it's just a really simple pattern. Meets the minimum password requirements, but again, isn't what we're going to be encouraging people. This one here looks a little bit better until you realize that it's somebody's pet's name, Tiger, and somebody's birthday, 1601. This is a very common pattern you'll see on a lot of passwords. Very, very easily guessable. This is the sort of stuff we need to be discouraging. The problem is our tooling really doesn't help with this. We see a lot of things where, you'll see this repeated over and over again in a lot of applications you use that ask you to generate a password. All right, IT industry leaders aren't even encouraging this particularly well. If you throw any of those passwords into, say, PayPal, it'll probably say, "Yeah, well done, really strong password." And that's not what we want to be encouraging at all. It's not even help our own security industry. We'll see antivirus vendors, for example, putting out big posters that you can stick up in your things, saying exactly these sorts of things. Oh yeah, make your password like your pet name, but change some put a symbol in there. It's like it adds one bit of entropy. It really does not actually help all that much at all. It wouldn't be a security talk without showing off this particular comic. I'm sure we've all seen it to death, but for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a really fantastic website, xkcd.com, very funny, but lots of good geek humor in it. But they came up with this absolutely fantastic comic that's basically summarize the frustration that is password, like the traditional way of generating a password. If you have a look at the top there, it's quite difficult to remember that password, but it's actually quite easy to guess it. There's not a lot of randomness in this. Each of those little squares there is a bit of entropy. And 1,000 guesses a second for about 3 days, you're probably going to get that. But the one down the bottom here, this is against what we're normally getting people to do. There's no capital letters or symbols in here whatsoever. But this is actually quite a random password, but it's a lot easier to remember. This is what we should be encouraging people to go towards. So there's an absolutely fantastic JavaScript library made by the folks at Dropbox called ZXCVBN. If you can't remember it, it's actually just the bottom 4 letters on your keyboard, named after a terrible password. The whole point of this is it's a JavaScript library that gives you an extremely easy to use password strength meter. And it is based on actually intelligent entropy-based strength measurements. Basically, what it does is it breaks down your password into dictionary words, patterns, dates, etc., and figures out how much randomness is actually in this password. If you throw correct horse battery staple all lowercase into that thing, it'll say, yeah, it's actually a reasonably good password. Whereas that QUER43 @ pattern on the keyboard, it will actually say, yeah, no, this is terrible. It's just a pattern on your keyboard. It actually figures this sort of stuff out and figures out how many bits of entropy based on those turns and all sorts of things. Really, really clever library. But ultimately, what it does is it provides recommendations to your user as they're typing it on how to strengthen your passwords as you choose them, and gives you a simple 1 to 5 scoring system as you type to go and work with. It gives you a whole bunch of other information as well, like how many bits of entropy it estimates, things like that. But ultimately, it gives you a really nice password strength meter that is actually reasonably intelligent. So I highly recommend it. There's a QR code if you want to scan that. That's good.
Where does the QR code take us?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a few of them. Yeah, so encourage entropy over patterns and discourage common passwords. That's something I forgot to talk about as well. The Regex EVB, and it also has some dictionaries based inside it. One of those is the top 10,000 most common passwords. It counts that basically as like 2 or 3 bits of entropy. If you strung a whole bunch of different top 10,000 common passwords, you probably actually come up with a reasonably strong one. Other one will say it's okay, but for the most part, they don't add anything to your score. Last thing, discouraging automated signups. So we all know these things. Good old captures to try and prevent spammers from signing up, loads and loads of accounts and spamming all of your users. But frankly, they're absolutely infuriating. I mean, this one is literally the best of them that I've got to show you here. That one's probably a little more readable, but it's kind of infuriating to try and figure out what the hell that's talking about there. And you got that one there, which is just utterly ridiculous. This one here, which is just asinine. You can read it, but it's freaking awful. That one there, which looks like it's just a bug. It's just squished it in too much, and you can't tell what that is. There's a couple more there. It's just like, you know, what is that? And the one down the bottom there is just, again, you could probably read it. It's absolutely asinine. This isn't so much for preventing spammers from signing up, this is preventing humans from signing up half the time. So but absolutely infuriating. And frankly, they don't even do the job anymore. Sure, these are all designed so you can't automate computers anymore, and you have to involve humans. So what is, you know, I guess the underground, not really dark web, I guess, but more grayish web does? They automate the humans instead. This is a website you can sign up for, and for 70 cents, you get 1,000 images. You send off to an API. It goes and gives it to an actual human, and then they'll go and solve it for you, and then it comes back over the API in about 15 seconds. It's quite accurate. About 95% of the time, it will come back with the actual correct one. But yeah, these are actually solved by actual humans. What they've got is them on the back end there. They've just got people just sitting there day after day, just solving captures for you, and they get a small portion of that 70 cents per 1,000 images. They've even got a little thing down the bottom here, trying to, you know, bleeding hearts kind of thing here, saying, you know, that 100% of the images decoded here are by human workers from around the world. You're helping feed them and their families. If you, it's absolute like human exploitation. But you know, spammers will absolutely use this. It's not very nice. Troy Hunt, again, the guy who made Have I Been Pwned, bought $10 worth of this, just demonstrate exactly how effective this thing is, and found that about if he had 30 threads, you know, it's just sending 30 images at a time off to the system, you get about 60 of them a minute coming back, most of them succeeding, as you can tell. And this worked for about 20 minutes before he ran out of credits. Captures aren't working particularly well in this particular case. So what do you do when you're faced by a swarm of robots trying to attack your site? Use Google reCAPTCHA, I guess. I really don't have a decent answer for this one, unfortunately. Google look like they're doing sort of the best job of this particular scenario at this stage. I mean,
have you experimented with sending JavaScript challenges?
I'm going to go and tackle on that one. So yeah, those are the sort of like proof of work statements and JavaScript challenges where you make your computer work a certain amount to go and prove that, yes, okay, I've worked this hard and now I can go and sign up. And that sort of slows down a lot of the bots. And it is kind of a little more of an effective way of dealing with things. But the problem is you do have to rely on JavaScript a little bit. You might toast someone's mobile battery if you're making them work too hard, and when people disable JavaScript, and then you've got other problems as well, and you have to fall back. Honestly, I think the easiest answer for most websites, at least anyway, is just use Google Recapture. It deters simple bots, and it at least raises the effort for more advanced ones.
So there's one issue we've come across with that is that it's blocked in China.
Ah, that's interesting.
So some sites, for example, government sites, they have to, provide their site to everyone, no matter what country they're in.
Yeah, and
if you're traveling, and so basically that fails. So that's quite annoying.
That would be really, really
Some
annoying.
of the JavaScript we've done is just to sort of ramp up. So rather than just work, just detect a script. So if it doesn't have a JavaScript engine, it's just a very simple calculation.
That's, yep, again.
And then you can kind of ramp it up to the actual proof of work if you want.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I say, it does at least raise the bar for more advanced bots, and it gets rid of a lot of the simpler ones. So that will get rid of a lot of your problems. The other thing about alienating your user base as well, not only eliminating Chinese users, which is a very, very good point. I didn't realize that. Also, disabilities is another thing as well. Again, coming from a healthcare background, if we had this kind of thing where you could have a public sign up for some sort of system like this, you might alienate a lot of your users who may be, for example, vision impaired, or may have may not be able to hear properly either, so they won't be able to use the audio version of this as well. You've got to be a little bit careful about who you're targeting with this thing, and you may end up alienating a bit of your user base with it. So just be careful about that as well. Just going to look through my notes as well if I missed anything. No, that's pretty much it, really. The other nice thing about Google Recapture is it at least used to have some sort of community give back kind of charitable aspect to it, where it would actually OCR books for libraries so that they could digitize a lot of public domain works, but they're not really doing that so much nowadays. They're more just sort of improving their own mapping service. So, but at the end of the day, it is an option you've got in your arsenal. It's reasonably easy to deploy. Go through a couple of bonus ones quickly because I'm running a little bit over time here. RDoS attacks. So if everybody's familiar with Regex, I love this quote. Sometimes when confronted with a problem, people will think, I know, I'll use your expressions. Now you have two problems. It's really frustrating. But I mean, ultimately, this is kind of baffling. I still haven't really gotten my head very well. But ultimately, if you've got this particular, a mask like this, and you throw this particular string at it to try and see whether it exists inside it, it'll take about 16 possible paths to go and figure out whether it's in there or not. If you throw something slightly longer, it'll be 65,000 possible paths. The more A's you throw in there, exponentially the amount of computation you require ramps up. And you can actually use it if you just throw sort of like say 50 A's at it. You'll probably lock a server down for about quite a few hours. And DDoS it is layer 7, application level denial of service attack. The explanation for it is somewhat involved in this baffling diagram here, which I sort of looked at. I don't really have a lot of time to explain it, but ultimately, if you're really interested in this particular problem, there's another QR code which you may or may not trust, or you can just look it up on our website. Other one as well, bonus legal verification. There's realme as well. If you actually need to verify that this is actually someone's legal name, you can sign up with these guys. They do allow some commercial customers to hook into the service, and get customers to go and sign in. Customers to sign in here. The Department of Internal Affairs actually runs this, so data that's coming back is actually they've got they're actually legal stuff. And then you can verify that's right that way. Okay, so basically, you can go through one of the major changes here after one page. Before all this, my best idea is our enumeration. Quick demo here. Actually, I haven't rushing I'll come back to this demo. Basically, if you wanting to hide particular users on your website, you want to make sure that they don't, random numbers that can't figure out whether a username exists or not. There's a particular timing channel attack that exists on a lot of websites, where, for example, the password reset feature. If you go and throw a username, an email address that doesn't exist exists or not in the database, even if it is just saying, oh yeah, the user exists on every single scenario. So there's some ways you can work around that by, say, sending off a fake email so that the timings are about the same. But yeah, just be very careful. Make sure you react the same regardless of the user exists or not in some scenarios. Other scenarios, usernames existing or not existing may not be an issue. So just ask yourself the question, basically, is there any reason any of my users would not want to be found on my website? Let people use password managers. This drives me utterly insane that people are still doing this in 2017. In HTML, you can obviously do some things with JavaScript eventing. So, for example, if someone pastes something into a field, you can make JavaScript react to that. And if it just says return false, basically the browser will just say, oh yeah, sorry, it will react in such a way that it basically doesn't allow it. And the whole reason for this is just utterly baffling. We've got an example here from British Gas, who, when somebody was complaining about this because it broke their password manager, and now they can't, copy the password into the thing. They just said, as a business, we've chosen not to have compatibility with password managers. It was like absolutely no reasonable explanation. When pressed for this, they then responded saying they'd lose their security certificate if we allowed pasting, and it would leave them open to a brute force attack, which is, it just shows an absolutely massive misunderstanding of what their threat model is. And I think that they think that hackers are just some guys are sitting there with Notepad on one side and a browser on the other, and they're sitting there copy pasting passwords in constantly. It raises a lot more questions than it actually answers, and it is absolutely terrifying. It's not just British Gas that are doing this. I'm just calling them out because, again, it was on Troy Hunt's website and it's easy to just steal screenshots. There's a lot of financial institutions that are doing this, that have this problem as well, like PayPal, GE Capital, Al Raj Bank. They've all been called out for doing this particular practice in the past before, and it's all just security theatre. We should not be doing this at all. So do not disable password functionality in password fields.
The same goes for email addresses.
Yes, exactly.
Especially since most browsers will automatically populate your email into a field that says type equals email.
Absolutely. It's slightly less of a security concern and more of just an absolute frustration with users, but you don't want to piss your users off. That's exactly it. And there's that aspect to it as well with the whole disabling on paste. Just don't do it. Password resets. Email is kind of a skeleton key for a lot of people. If you break into somebody's email account, you can get access to not only all of their emails, but every single account ever signed up with that email address. Because frankly, a lot of the time, the way the password resets work is you just send an email off to their email address with a unique link. Make sure you store that reset token in there. And when they click on it, it comes back and you can verify, yep, definitely that they're in that email address. There's not really a much better, if anybody's got a better way of doing password resets, I'd love to hear it, because a lot of the time, this is basically the industry standard, but don't reinvent what isn't totally broken, I guess. You're not going to be any worse than other people for using this one. Just a few key notes with this, though. Don't ask for security questions. Security questions are really dumb, and I'll get to that in a little bit later. Just ask for the email address and go through it for that. It's not really appropriate for 2FA resets as well. I'll go into it a little bit later, but basically password, when it comes to, if it's something you know and something you have, don't try and cross those over when trying to reset things. If you have to do a 2FA reset, just, a lot of people will use SMS. It's kind of insecure, but that's what a lot of people end up doing at the moment. Use backup codes. I think it's a much better way of doing things. So when they sign up for your website and activate 2FA, get them to go and download some 2FA codes and stick them in a safe. Be careful when you're using this sort of thing. Don't let help desk necessarily reset this, or at least if they do, give them some really decent social engineering training. I have a video, again, I'm running out of time, so I can't show you, but there is a really decent scenario, so a really decent example about exactly how you can, you just call somebody up and just say, oh yeah, hi, I'm actually dealing with this person, press emergency into them, and they'll fall over themselves trying to help you out and reset your password, reset whoever's password it is that you claim to be. So be careful with that. Oh, sorry, missed a bit there. So yeah, be careful with social engineering. Authenticate the user through their email address. So it's not particularly Flash, but that's the best I can do on. Last one, always use type password for password fields. I know this sounds obvious because it's the easiest way to go and do the whole password masking thing, right? But a lot of designers will actually ask you, or will quite often not want to use the password field. They want to use just a normal text field and style it in such a way that it masks the password. Because they want to do fancy UI sort of styling things. And back in the day, it actually used to be a little bit harder to style password fields than it was just normal text fields. So the problem is when you're using actual password fields, some browsers, I have yet to have anybody confirm this properly for me, but I've certainly seen the rumor, at least anyway. The browsers at least handle the sensitive credentials a little bit differently in memory. Like, for example, they'll do garbage collection a little more often on certain sets of data that might store it in particular ways in memory that are slightly less accessible to other things. I'm not very much into, so I'm not very familiar with the whole sort of memory management aspect of particularly browsers, but yeah, this is one thing to consider. Changes in behavior. Password fields actually react differently in the browser than normal text fields. Like, for example, autocomplete. It won't try and start storing things in a user dictionary. You don't want to have your guests come around and start using your browser and suddenly your passwords are being dumped to all sorts of various fields, specifically mobiles in particular. Browsers will actually warn users if the page is loaded over insecure HTTPS, which when the page contains a password field. Eventually, it's just going to be like that for everything. But at the moment, if it contains a password field, it will actually warn users this is not going to be secure. That's actually quite a nice feature, at least from a user's perspective anyway, so don't try and work around that one. And nowadays, it actually can still be styled. It is basically about the same nowadays, if not a little bit. If not, if it's not exactly the same, it's very similar, and you can certainly achieve the same effect. Here's a really interesting example of this particular issue. This is LastPass. It's not a web page, but it is an application. It demonstrates the example perfectly. You can see the problem I've got with this here. It's typed in my password as the password field in the top there. New MacBook, however, displays it on the new touch bar. It's not ideal. The reason why for this is because OS X actually has a special text field for passwords, any secure string. And that, again, handles stuff that's put into it a lot different. It handles it differently to the way that normal text fields would work. LastPass instead just used a normal text field and just replaced all the letters with dots. Secure text input is more than just drawing bullets on the screen. Don't try and fake it, like Jane on Twitter. Just use what's built into the framework. Okay, so during the login, so I'm going to rip through this now. Okay, securing data in transit. Now we've got our web browser here, and it's trying to talk to Geekbank. Usual sort of login thing. Once you fill in the form, we hit the submit button. We do a post request. This is over HTTPS, and the data on the end there. Data containing a username and password. Browser responds back. So web server responds back with the redirect to the account page. We've got our attacker here. I love that stock photo of the attacker, of that hacker. It's amazing. It's do hackers actually normally wear those?
You only need one hand.
Exactly. Yeah. And he wants to go and steal that username and password. So he goes and launches about a middle attack. But that's not going to work because it is over HTTPS, and the data he's going to be intercepting is just, as far as he can tell, complete garbage. But he has an idea. The way that the page was done, the login form itself was over HTTP. It was sent, requested over HTTP. The user may, for example, have typed in bank.dev.nz/account/login into the thing, missing the HTTP at the beginning, but it defaults to insecure HTTP by default, unless you're using HTTPS, but that's a different scenario. The server responds back with, here's the login page. Inside the login page says, please post this to the secure endpoint. The hacker sits there and goes, hang on, if I intercept that page before it comes in, and I deliver one that does not have a HTTPS, when the person sends the form back, it's not going to be over HTTP, and then I can go and steal it from that. So key takeaway here is to use HTTPS everywhere, not just when you're sending the data, but when you're actually doing all the forms and loading up the page for the first time. HSTS is a really good mitigation for this. The first time the user goes to the site will come back and say, whenever you talk to me, always use HTTPS. Do not ever talk to me over a normal HTTP again for this specific period of time. It's absolutely fantastic. I recommend using it if you can. Second one, mitigating session hijacking and fixation. So rewind back to about 1995 when, sort of web frameworks were sort of just starting to come out of the, just starting to come of age, and browsers didn't really support, at least reliably support cookies yet. So we had some workarounds which we had, like for example, sessions where session IDs were put into the URL instead of sent around as cookies, so that we could actually, still track the user as they're going around the page and give some context to what is otherwise a stateless protocol. We've got our hacker here. Fast forward to 2017, all of these web frameworks still use this because it's just a sort of a legacy supported feature. Sure, it never really activates in reality, but it's still there. The hacker here goes and sends a message off to this person, says, you should totally click this link. Here it is. It's HTTPS and it definitely goes to bank.geek.nz. There's nothing suspicious about that. So we know that whatever we're sending off definitely is going to the right place. This guy's not going to be intercepting my credentials at all in any particular way. So we go, okay, we'll give this a try, shall we? We go to HTTPS bank.geek.nz, send that little weird looking thing in the middle there, which is actually your session ID, and I want to go and get free money. Browser responds back with, actually, you need to log in first. So you go, okay then. And then after doing the whole login dance, you go and send your credentials off again over HTTPS, and your browser goes, cool, okay, Mr. whatever that session ID is, you're all logged in now, you can go to the URL you requested. Browser goes, finally, that's great. I want my free money. Your browser's then like, wait, hang on, that doesn't exist. That's not a real page. And you're like, oh, okay, someone's joking around with me here, whatever. Meanwhile, the hacker who sent you that session ID in the first place still remembers what it is, but now it's associated with your account, and he goes and steals the money. This is a little bit of a contrived scenario nowadays, because a lot of the time we will not be using, session IDs in the URL bar. We do see this pop up every now and then. And all of the time it's because we're not changing these session IDs every single time the context of the user switches around. So every time a user logs in or logs out, we need to change those session IDs. There's also session hijacking attacks, just more in general. A little bit more complicated, but we'll go through this just a little bit slower. When the user sends a thing over HTTP with the cookie on the end there, the hacker steals it. It's really, if you're not using HTTPS, you can have your session stolen, and hackers will then assume your session and do all sorts of nasty things with it. Again, I have to reiterate it, use HTTPS everywhere, expire session cookies after every login and log out. How are we doing for time? We've got another 20 minutes. Okay. Rate limiting brute force attempts. Going back to this model here again, we've just got the hacker here, no other browser involved. A lot of people think brute forcing attempts are just it's just a simple matter of just going, okay, we'll try it with AAA as the password. Why is it doing that? AA as the password, AAB, AAC, AAD, AAE, AAF. Eventually, they're going to go and stumble across a right password. It just may take a very, very long time. The reality is a lot of attackers don't work like this. They're actually going to be working off models similar to this. This is the a nice infographic showing some of the top most common passwords out there on the internet. The reality is this is actually quite. They've obviously taken a lot of effort to go through and make sure they get rid of all the swear words, because in reality the top 100 most common passwords looks more like this. But what the hacker's going to end up doing is we actually end up trying the most common ones first. Password, 12345, QWERTY, dragon, monkey, your pet's name. Your web server might look at this and start going, okay, this is looking a little bit suspicious. There's definitely a lot of failed attempts here. Let's go and block this particular IP address that this is coming in from. And so the hacker's like, okay, we'll just try a whole bunch of different IP addresses. We'll just try the same thing, and we'll keep going. At this point, you might be tempted to just say, okay, right, I can't block all the IP addresses. Let's just start rate limiting the account. I'll lock the account down for the next 15 minutes to, stop this guy from getting in. And then after 15 minutes, we'll unlock it again. But these attackers may be using this to subvert your system, like, for example, lock out all of your admins. They may just try the same password over and over and over again, constantly locking all your admins out so they can't react to what's really going on. There may be some other attack going on behind the scenes. You essentially end up DOSing yourself. So stopping rate limiting doing rate limiting is kind of difficult in some scenarios. Do try and block IPs. Just block them temporarily. However, you don't want to be blocking IP address permanently, and then it rotates around to some other user, and you've lost a potential customer. Don't block accounts necessarily, or don't outright block them. Maybe throw some stumbling blocks in the way. Maybe challenge an account with capture. Slow them down basically, so they're not trying so many passwords all at once or so many credentials all at once. And yes, as I say, block the IPs temporarily. Don't block them permanently. Why is it doing that? And the last thing is two-factor authentication. Why are you going backwards? So we've got 3 factors of authentication here, which is there's more. These are the 3 most commonly talked about ones: knowledge, which is something you know; position, something you have; and inheritance, something you are. Something you are is a little bit harder to go and talk about on the web, deal with on the web. It's also really hard if it gets stolen to actually go and revoke those credentials and do so and make some new ones, because you can't exactly cut off your fingerprint or something like that, or replace your retinas. But some of these things look like this. Like, for example, knowledge will be, common ones are passwords and pins. Something you know, it's not something that physically exists, it's in your head. They're not security questions. I hate security questions. Position, U2F tokens. I don't know how many people have got those things here, but Google's been pushing them quite heavily, and they're supported on GitHub and Dropbox and all sorts of things nowadays. But basically, they're like this. You plug it in. When the light flashes, you press the button. It's dead simple. It's actually quite hard to get phished by them. They're actually really, really cool. The only problem is they only work in Chrome at the moment, but hopefully some other browsers will start adopting them soon. HOTP tokens and TOTP tokens, otherwise known as Google Authenticator, basically. Very, very popular. You'll see that all over the show. Only problem is, of course, if you lose your phone, you have to go and reset them, or redo account recovery somehow. That gets a little tricky. SIM cards, a little bit easier to go and recover. If you lose your phone, your mobile provider will often give you a new one. Problem is SMS messages, which you usually normally use to go and prove that you own the SIM card, can be intercepted in some cases. They're not really considered secure anymore.
Deprecated by NIST.
Deprecated by NIST, there you go. I remember we had a big discussion about this one earlier. Yes, so they're deprecated by NIST, but you'll still see a lot of websites still using it because it is convenient. So I guess there's that sort of balance there, but generally try not to use them. RSA secure tokens, basically Google Authenticator on your keyring. Smart card. So they kind of look like your credit cards a lot of the time. You plug them into your keyboard. You'll see a lot of the public sectors still use these things every now and then, but they come in all sorts of different forms, some of them are USB sticks all over the show. Your phone and laptop, a lot of the time, for example, when you log in and you ask you for your Google Authenticator token, it says remember me for 30 days, it basically drops a cookie on your browser that stays there and proves that this is the browser that it last talked to, and you can trust this one. So it's kind of a version of position. And, even physical keys. Again, you've got to be very careful about this particular scenario, but you can also kind of say that two-factor authentication is, for example, getting into a particular office and using a specific machine. You can stuff that up in some cases because you can get around it with other sorts of things, but it's kind of a two-factor sort of. And then you've got inheritance, which is, fingerprint scans, iris scans, facial recognition, DNA, voice recognition, which is a little bit sketchy. But yeah, it proves it's something you are. So ideally use 2 of these 3. For example, in the Geekbank scenario, we're actually using passwords, U2F tokens, HOTP tokens, and sorry, Scooch, we're also using SIM cards. It was just an easy thing to demo. Yeah, basically, ultimately, if someone breaks one of these factors, they also have to break the other factor, and it's quite a lot. It's quite difficult to have to deal with both. Like if you're trying to compromise somebody's account, to compromise both those bands is quite a bit more difficult. If you have your password leaked, for example, you also have to fly all the way over to New Zealand and steal someone's keys. You know, it's kind of puts it out of the realm of most attacks. So use two different factors when authenticating users. I'm going to stop very, very quickly there and just point out that this is the dumbest stock photo I've ever seen. It's like, I saw it and then I was like, immediately, this has to be used in some slide somewhere, because it's like, you know, it doesn't even make sense in any kind of context. Anyway, after the login. So once we've got the login done, user's been authenticated, everything's all good. We're going to now try, we're going to point out some other things here. For example, open redirects. If you want to try this demo, you're more than welcome to try it out. This is a sort of malicious link. I will give you the username and password that will be used for it. But basically, do we have time for this demo?
Yes.
We do. Okay, let's go for it then. Skip one. I'll at least do one demo.
You went to all the trouble of making a bank, for goodness sake.
I know, exactly. I feel like having to run through this quickly. I'm always so much slower when I actually present these things. I'll get there very shortly. There we go. Okay, so I'll click the link and we're going to, it's opened up an edge for something.
So the people that are listening online, there was 15, now there's 14 of you. So didn't like me talking. There's a question and answer live chat thing, so stick any questions in there.
Cool. So we have, again, it's a little bit hard to see because of the projector here, but we have we've clicked the link and it's taking us to the login form. If you have a look at the top here, there's definitely the padlock there, so it's definitely over HTTPS. Because it's Edge, it's being a little bit obnoxious about it. Going to bank.geek.nz/account/login. And we can ignore the rest, surely. We go to the username. So we're going to type in test account, the username, and test account 1 exclamation mark, because I've totally listened to my previous advice. And we're going to log in. How is that not working? Okay. Oh. Type that in wrong. Test account. Test account 1 exclamation mark, right? Oh, actually, I just got hacked. If you have a look at the is not geek.is is evil website.blog.co.uk. If we go back, notice how the website, one of the websites I actually just typed this into is actually not GeekBank. The reason why is when I was back at this one here, I checked this very carefully, but the return URL is actually going to a different website. And what happened is when I typed it in the first time, I got it correct. But then the website goes, okay, cool. So the return URL is actually some other website. I went over to that other website, which pretended to be me failing to type in the login page. I got tricked into typing it a second time because who checks the URL bar a second time? And when it went through here, if you can tolerate, well, there we go. Test account password, test account login. There we go. So that's sort of the core basis of an open redirect attack. I'm going to go close you again. It's even less obvious on a mobile because the mobile URL bar is so much smaller. All you're going to see is https bank.geek.nz / some other random crap. You're not going to check it very thoroughly, but the dodgy bit is actually on the end there. So when you're doing your redirects, always make sure it goes to a domain you control. So either say only relative links or only links to these domains that I whitelist. It's the safest way to go and make sure that this kind of thing is not going to get exploited. Security questions. Yeah, I finally get to rant about this. So remember this page here about factors of authentication, specifically about the knowledge part of this. It is something you know, not something you and a bunch of other people know. It drives me nuts that people seem to think this is actually going to be authenticating you by asking these questions. The problem is look, that there's so many problems with these. Like for one of them is such as the fact that they're easily predicted. You know, one of the questions I often get asked by these security questions things is, what was the make of your first car? It's like there's going to be about 6 of those in New Zealand. You know, like it's a 5-letter word. It's probably not going to be Tesla. I guess it's probably going to be Honda. Sorry, 5-letter word. It's not going to be Tesla. It's going to be Honda.
I've seen the shoe size.
Shoe size, yeah. What is your shoe size? That's absolutely absurd. They're easily discovered. So it's like, what is your mother's maiden name? I don't know. I'll ask Google. You know, it's really easy to figure this out. Sensitive personal identifiable information. A lot of the US websites will ask, what is your social security number? That's a terrifying thing to go and ask people, especially when security questions don't normally get stored properly. Anybody who knows what they're doing is probably not going to be using security questions. So you know that if that gets leaked, that's a really bad thing. So yeah, they don't authenticate you against other people. Like when you're asked, what is your first high school? It's like, well, 2,000 other people know what my first high school was. I went to school with them. A lot of them are easily forgotten. About 3 months ago, for the lols, I decided I was going to log back into RuneScape to see how things were still going with that. And I couldn't remember the password, so I was like, oh, I'll do a password reset. And it says, what was your childhood hero? I'm like, I don't know what I put as my childhood hero 10 years ago. So, like, which one? I don't know. So, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then ultimately, they're just like, you know, you get childish and condescending ones as well. Like, my absolute favorite, what is your favorite color? I just... So, not naming any names here, but a particular New Zealand bank has this as one of their logins. It's not just password resets that do that, you know, that have these security questions. This is actually taken from that particular bank's own website, which is why it's kind of embarrassing that it's actually, that's the question that's asking. But I mean, yes, to be fair, it does say, although your family and friends might know the answers to your security questions, your number and confidential passwords you have to protect your private banking from them. It's not really it sort of calls into question why you're doing it in the first place. And their answer for that is spyware, basically. What they do is they get you to not type it in on the keyboard, they get you to click the buttons on the screen. But if you're infected with a keylogger, it's, you know, it's kind of a bit dubious as to whether this is going to be reliable or not anyway. That looks like that's pizza, so I'm going to hurry up. We've only got a couple of slides left, so that's good. And, you know, it's not two-factor authentication by any means. This is something you know, and something you know plus a bunch of other people as well. Just don't use them. Security questions don't reliably authenticate an individual and are easily predicted. Also, I'm going to throw a second note in here. I'm 27 years old. I don't have a favorite color.
Everything's just grey now.
It's great, exactly. Last one, email validation. Again, this is going to look very similar to the password resets we did before. Please click this link, store the validation token inside the database with an expiry. When the user clicks the link, they're proving that yes, they actually own that email address. A lot of you, just a very quick note on sort of UI UX here. A lot of users are lazy and fickle here. They probably aren't going to do this if they don't have to. It's kind of a frustrating thing to have to go and then log into your email address and then do this other thing as well. They just want to get to your damn site, right? So you've kind of got to ask yourself a little bit, is it going to be a massive issue if someone is giving me an email address that they don't actually control? Like, is that going to cause some security concerns down the track? Is this going to cause a problem if, like, say, I have to do a forced password reset to everybody and some people are going to get locked out of their accounts? Ask yourself that question. Everybody's going to have a different answer for that particular scenario, but if it is going to be a sort of thing where, if, you know, not validating your email address is going to be a bit of a problem, then maybe you might want to enforce this. So when they sign in, when they complete the registration, they have to go and click this link. They have to go back to their email, click the link, and then it goes back to the site, and then they can continue onwards with this as well. Some other things, you might be able to get away with, say, 72 hours where they can validate it, so that when they get home and check their email before they go to bed or whatever they do, they can then click the link just while they're at it and then just forget about it. It might be a little more convenient for people. Talk with your UI UX people. They will be able to answer that. Get security involved with that as well. They might be able to answer that a little bit better. It's going to be different for every scenario. For Geekbank, we're going to make it so it's mandatory. You have to go and click this link before you can log in because it is a bank. You're dealing with financial data. You don't want any sort of dodgy emails and things like that. You know, if for example, you need to do a forced reset, you want to make sure that they can get access to that money again. They're not just going to be permanently locked out and, you know, have to go to a bank themselves and, you know, financial troubles, that kind of thing. That's the sort of scenario I'm working with in that particular regards. Also, when it comes to these sorts of things, don't try and be too clever here unless you really know what you're doing, and it's quite hard to know if you really know what you're doing. There are some scenarios here where you can avoid the database whatsoever by having, for example, an HMAC key where you can have, I don't know, the user ID in there and a date, and then you wrap the whole thing in an HMAC and make sure that, you know, when the user clicks it, you know, they can't make their own HMAC sort of thing, and when it gets sent back, it proves that it's actually them. It's quite easy to stuff a lot of those sorts of things up, and it's quite easy to not know you've stuffed it up. Who was the guy who quoted the, you know, it's quite easy to make a crypto system where you can't? Schneier, yeah. So yeah, it's quite easy to make a crypto system where you yourself cannot break it. It doesn't prove that somebody else can't break it. It's quite hard to know that you're doing this sort of thing right. So if you are going to do something a little bit more beyond a actually secure random, you know, just cryptographically secure random number thing, stuff into a database, and, you know, do some sort of fancy sort of thing with it. Talk to some security experts, see if that particular model works. I'm sure there's lots of people here who would be quite happy to go and do a pen test for you. Make sure the URL only applies to that one user as well. You don't want to, you know, validate your email address against somebody else's account or vice versa. Yeah, things like that. So yeah, send them a temporary link, get them to the channel. That's the easiest way to go and deal with that particular scenario. Right, okay, we're nearly at the end there. Just going to go quickly rip through these three little just side points here. Third-party identity providers. There are some very large websites, very large companies that have very large security teams that dedicate themselves to just this whole thing that I've been talking about before. They spend a lot more time than I have. They're a lot smarter than I am, and they'll give you this for free. All you need to do is you just drop the like. There you go.
Speaking of smart, did you hear about one login? One of these providers storing everyone's passwords in plain text.
Oh God! Did you say one login?
Yes.
No comment. Yeah. So ones that aren't one login, for example, like say maybe Facebook or Google or Microsoft or Twitter or some things like that. There'll be a, you know, you can drop a login with Twitter or whatever button on your site, and with a minimal configuration, you can go and just hook into their sort of thing as well. Be aware though that there is some concerns with this. For example, when it comes to this bank aspect of things, if I had a login with Facebook button for the bank and Facebook decided to suddenly disappear from the face of the planet, a lot of people get locked out of their money. So maybe it's not a good model for me, but maybe it is for like your gaming clan or, you know, for other websites. You know, probably a perfectly valid scenario. Sorry. Next thing, mobile logins. I know this is a OWASP, you know, sort of web application security thing, but mobile logins are sort of becoming more and more. Mobile apps are sort of becoming more and more prevalent, and they're using APIs and all sorts of web-like things. One trend I'm seeing lately is having applications which use PIN numbers to log into their to open up the app. I know. Does anybody here from PowerShell? I know that those guys have started doing it recently. It's actually quite cool. And they've got a thing where you can either use a PIN number or you can use your fingerprint. Actually, KiwiBank have the same sort of thing as well. You've got to make sure, however, that you're not sending the PIN number to the remote server as your login. PINs are really, really low entropy. They're just really convenient as well. What you do is you store the token which authenticates you in the secure area, using a secure framework that's provided by your mobile operating system. And then you use your PIN number to go and unlock that particular thing. Your mobile will, the operating system will have parameters in it that allow you to do something like, if the PIN number is wrong 3 times, I'm going to forget the token, and you're going to have to go and log in the more traditional, username and password way. It's a convenience factor. It can be secure if you do it right, but just make sure you're aware of how that whole model works, and don't try and just send that shortened PIN number or a photo of your fingerprint off to the remote server to try and validate it that way. And lastly, it wouldn't be an OWASP talk without mentioning the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. We've mentioned a couple of them already. Open redirection attacks are one of them. Sensitive data exposure with the whole HTTPS thing. That's a very common sort of thing in a lot of login and registration forms as well. But there's other things here as well, like for example, SQL injection. It's not unique to just logins, but it is particularly devastating if you don't get it right there, because logins are by definition unauthenticated. So anybody can really blast things in there. If you type a specific string into a password field, you might be able to trick the database into going, oh yeah, we found the password, and it didn't actually. Cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgeries as well. Those are also concerns here, possibly to a little bit of a less extent than when you're actually authenticated, but they still can be a bit of an issue. That just don't like it by itself. And it's all going crazy. So anyway, that's it for me. Is that all? All that just to allow logins? Yes. Oh, sorry, go on.
Okay. I've got a question.
That's good. Oh, this is the last slide. So, yeah, so all that just to allow logins, yes, and more. This is probably just the tip of the iceberg, to be absolutely honest. This is as much as I can fit into a slightly over an hour long talk. But honestly, if you're doing most of these things, you're probably going to be better than like 95% of the websites out there. There may be slightly different ways to go about some of these things. Maybe some of the stuff that I've said doesn't apply to your particular threat models. It's all about sort of thinking and understanding exactly how those particular attacks apply to you. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. As defenders, we're pretty bad at communicating a lot of the stuff with between ourselves. Attackers are a lot better at this than we are, so we need to up our game and sort of help people defend against these kinds of attacks. So I'm more than happy to go and help anybody out. If they've got any particular questions, I'll flick me a quick email, I'll see what I can do, help you out in my spare time. Code using these demos is on GitHub, but please note that it is deliberately weakened. This is not a reference you guys should be using for what a good login is. I'm using some of these things to show you demos about how they can be attacked. So use them, get familiar with those kinds of attacks, but use the code, get familiar with those kinds of attacks, but please don't use it as in production. And thanks again to Insomnia and Regex for sponsoring Pizza and Menu. Cheers.
Cool, thanks, Matt. I've got some questions from online. So one was a comment about the bad audio in the middle. So sorry about that.
That's right.
But I managed to fix it. So one comment was talking about the open redirect going to the fake website. The person commented that LastPass will save your bacon there because it won't pre-fill the password for the fake site. And so you might notice something's a little bit weird.
That's a very good point.
Another comment was that you shouldn't try and determine if an email address is valid. So this person's got one of the new domain, top-level domains, and they couldn't sign up to Spark because their email address wasn't valid, even though it's a real email. So yeah, either don't do that test or keep it up to date, I guess. Moral from that.
Yeah, if you follow the RFC and don't do more.
Yeah.
Also, plus is valid in username.
Yes, that drives me nuts, but I'm not allowed to use that one.
Someone filtered me.
So it is absolutely a valid thing to go and to fire an email off to whatever the user sent through and see if that got received. If you're ignoring the TLD sort of aspect of things and just trying it, your DNS will fail. You won't get to send an email if it's an invalid one. But if it is a valid one, then it will send it off. So I guess don't try and check to see whether it's a valid domain based on like a predefined list of what TLDs should be.
Is there any compelling reason not to just do a host lookup and go, yes, that's a domain?
Well, you do a host lookup and it says yes, that's a domain. You can even find out whether there's an MX record on that as well. But that'll only get you so far as to figure out whether this is potentially something we can send an email to. It still doesn't prove.
I'm just thinking in terms of the dumb top-level domain thing.
Yeah. So that may be one particular route.
Well, there's a guide to validating email addresses, and it actually explicitly states you're not supposed to check for that top-level domain.
Right. Yeah.
RFC.
Yep.
So like that's why. Yeah.
If you could flick that link, do you have a link to that particular page? Or?
Yeah, I can find out.
Yeah, pop it on the meetup site.
That'd be great actually, because that actually be really useful for some of my stuff as well.
I've got one more question from online, and then we can open to questions from the room. I'm talking loud, so hopefully they can hear it. So the question was, should you make people sign in again when validating the email?
Sorry, yes, I actually missed that particular part. I was supposed to talk about this. Generally, yes, it's kind of a bit of a pain, but what you one particular problem you can have if you don't make people try and sign back in again is you could trick people into clicking that link. So if you send it off to somebody who may not know better because you're wanting to prove that you own their email address, You send it off to somebody, they look through it and go, oh, I wonder what this link is, and they click it, and then they end up validating your email address. If they have to sign in with it, it's going to be a lot harder to go and trick them into doing that. You have to just start doing some social engineering things and start saying, oh yeah, you're about to receive this email. When you do that, click the link and then type these words in. It's a lot harder to go and pull off that kind of thing. So absolutely, get people to sign in after they click the validation link.
Cool. And questions from the room, and Matt will repeat your question so
Yes.
people online can hear it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes, not actually a question, but a note about your reset password slide.
Yep.
So if you scroll,
Let's see if we can.
oh,
Actually,
yeah. And the thing is that storing the plain text tokens in non-hashed way is the same as bad as storing the plain text passwords.
Which one are we talking about here? No, I'm not even getting links. No, that's completely wrong. I don't have any previews for this. I'm just currently clicking blind at them. Is it the password hashing ones?
No, reset passwords.
So
Password reset links.
password reset links. I'll try and find it. Registration page, resets. Let's just start clicking through here. This is the one here. Resets.
Yeah. So yes, here.
Yep.
The thing is that you need to hash reset token in the database as well.
Actually, it's a very good point. I am absolutely embarrassed that I didn't do that myself and didn't call that out. You did right. You need to protect that token. If that gets leaked, then people can start doing all sorts of nefarious stuff as well. So yes, hash that, and then when it comes back, hash the value that came back and check it against the value that's in there, and then that way you're not going to be able to get people who just reset your password based off a database dump. So yes, absolutely, you should be protecting that reset token. I am staying corrected. Yep, at the back.
What do you think is current standard to counter manage the browser attack? Because all that is good, but like it is going to help someone already on scan your browser.
So yeah, sorry, can you repeat that one?
The question was, this stuff is good, but it won't help if someone has control of your browser, like a man in the browser attack.
Absolutely, yes. A man in the browser attack is defend against, quite honestly, because you can't trust the thing you're even you're using. I don't know. Somebody got a better. I'm going to have to go and pass that on to the room.
It's a different threat model altogether.
Yeah.
Your job as the developer is to defend against attacks any way that you can. The user's job is to protect their system, isn't it?
Yeah, that's actually quite. Yeah, that's saves my bacon.
Two-factor
So
off. That's the function of two-factor off. Just to protect against malware browser.
Oh, sort of. You can, if you can't trust the browser, you could intercept those two-factor tokens, send it off to somebody else before it allows it to send off to the thing.
U2F token.
U2F token is going to be a lot harder. Yes.
Defends against the malware browser.
So
Still
to
possible to use it.
Yeah.
If they control the browser and you're now logged in.
Oh, if you're logged in,
yeah. So to
they control the client.
exactly. To summarize that for people on the web, yeah. If the browser itself is owned and you're suffering from man in the browser attacks, that's not really the domain of the web developer to try and resolve that particular problem, because that's not really going to be something you can do much to protect against. What we're dealing with here is you as the web developer making a website, whereas the user's own system where their browser is contained in is a completely different sort of threat domain, and that's really in the realm of something else.
Yeah, I would say the man in the browser is really bot in the browser most of the time. So
yeah,
the idea that there's someone shadowing you, I mean that does happen in some cases, but the idea that someone is shadowing you and live compromising your browser and then stealing money from your bank, most of the time the bot's collecting what you type and sending it back to command and control to collect, and then they try to log in en masse to many accounts. So
absolutely, yeah. But there's also other ways you can still deal with that as well. So instead of, just to repeat that, instead of just sitting there and monitoring what's being sent in and out and just replicating that back on some command and control server, you can also just say steal the active session tokens and maybe be able to go and deal with it that way as well. So it's quite hard to defend against that particular thing, but it's outside the scope of this discussion, unfortunately. Yeah. But U2F kind of helps with some of that. Yep.
So the sheer complexity of all of this hopefully leads people here to the conclusion of don't do it yourself if you can possibly avoid it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean third-party things. I'm talking in terms of frameworks that get most of this right.
Absolutely.
And I don't have a broad experience of different web development frameworks, but I know that some, for example, like Django's one that gets most of this pretty well done, except for a few of the things that it can't really subdue for you. It doesn't have it off the shelf. The version doesn't have good sign-up mechanisms, but it's session management and authentication and password hashing and session fixing protections, CSRF protections are all pretty good. That's the one that I have the most experience with. Is there a handful of frameworks that you can throw out that actually seem to have most of their I's crossed and T's dotted?
Well, so I can definitely say that Django seems to do their stuff reasonably well. I use Django. Django's great. If you guys want to make a website with something that's a bit more cross-platform, use Django. It's great. I'm a little bit more biased towards .NET technologies because I sort of came from a Microsoft shop back in the day. I really like ASP.NET despite some of its past history. It actually now does a lot of things that are on par with a lot of the other web browsers. They're actually quite good. And it does actually have a reasonably decent sign up, sort of an identity management thing built into its framework as well. So I can definitely, I can vouch for those too. It falls over in some areas, like for example, CSRF is kind of a bit more explicit. You have to say, please protect this from cross-site request forgery protection, but it at least does have that built in for you. One of the areas which I know definitely falls over a lot is hand-rolled PHP. I know a lot of the developers are sort of sitting there grinning, going, oh God, I've been there before. But yeah, as I say, PHP leaves a lot of it up to you to go and do yourself. So you have to roll your own cross-site request forgery protection. You have to roll your own cross-site scripting protection. Your own SQLi has some anti-patterns in it and things like that. It's not a particularly great way to do it, just raw PHP, but there are frameworks that will again help you out with that as well. I can't vouch for those. I haven't used them. I gave up PHP long ago, thank God. Yeah, those are the two that I can basically say are reasonably decent. ASP.NET Core and Django. I can
And I guess the other major languages would be Java, Ruby, Node at this point.
Yes.
Ruby, Rails does some of this, but I think you have to do. I think with Rails you have to add a bunch of extra gems that are separate from Rails itself to cover some of this stuff. Potentially, my Rails experience is very, very limited. Is anybody here more familiar with Rails? Might get to throw some names out. Yeah.
There are gems specific regarding to helping assisting Rails authentication system, and like identity, I think is one you can add. I'm not sure.
Devices is not common.
Yeah.
Someone online's also recommended YII2,
YII2, so
which is like Django with security by default, and that's in PHP.
right, yeah.
And like you said, like a framework that covers this for PHP in an easy to use way would be really important because a lot of people do roll it themselves and
Yeah,
ends up
absolutely.
being heartbreak.
And
The only
another
thing-
person says, but that's PHP.
Yeah.
Oh, there's trolls on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. I mean, I used to work in PHP. I did a little bit of Drupal development, and Drupal's got some of that stuff in it as well. But Drupal has its own nasty sort of things to it as well.
Does anyone know what the node situation is?
I couldn't answer that one
Anyone
myself.
know if it's-
Express has built-in stuff.
Sorry?
Similar to Ruby on Rails, Express and other like Node, Passenger and other like Node libraries all have different authentication stuff built into them with extension options.
Yeah.
So Express,
Cool.
was it Express and
Express, no, the other one is actually Ruby.
Sorry, yeah.
Two up.
yeah,
Express is
Express apparently has some good stuff in it as well. So yeah, I can only vouch for the stuff I know about.
Cool. So
Plug into Express.
I mean, this
Can we
is a
take
whole
this-
topic in itself.
yeah, let's take this. Let's take this onto the meetup comments. Not
Sound-
really a great place to discuss things.
But we're finding PHP. Nobody
uh,
knows doing that.
Lachlan has put the link to the
Yeah, check the
RTF,
RC.
RC.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Cool, and post any other hints on there as well. I'm going to cut off the questions because I'm really hot and the pizza's already getting cold. Let's just thank Matt again. I think he's done a good idea. And good talk. Cool. He's clapping for himself. So I'll stop the broadcast now. Thanks to the people who came online and to future listeners.